Got a few more minutes.
Okay, we are live, David, and I'm going to switch out because Jason is a juror.
Oh, that's right.
Okay, and David, I made you the host.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, let's do a kind of a roll call here. What do we have? We've got Folsom and Cameron Park.
I believe it's North City and
I'm sorry, North City. Sorry, my bad. Yes, North City, Cameron Park. We have juror 1, 2, 3. We have our jurors. Our judge is currently blacked out and will be joining us upon introduction. Our bailiff is bailiff. Oh, hello. Sorry about that.
Don't worry about it.
Our bailiff is ready. I think we have we have everybody. Angela, Venla, jurors, and myself. We're running. This has been a great day so far. I want to tell you, everybody, and staying on time is we're only off by about 5 minutes right now, which I think, considering all things, is really nothing.
Right. It's really outstanding.
Yeah, outstanding.
I noticed just somebody is named CP attorney and the D's at the end. If you could just move that D to right before attorney so it doesn't get truncated when the judge sees you. I'm not sure if I can tell who that is.
Let me see. We've got D,
Oh.
D.
Yeah, they did it. So
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, it looks like we're ready to go. And bailiff, you have the floor.
All rise. The Superior Court of Sacramento County is now in session. The Honorable Judge Merritt presiding. God save the court and this honorable state. Isn't it?
You're muted, Judge Merritt.
Judge, you're muted.
I got to start over again. You're going to have to hear it all. Sorry.
That's all right. That's
Sorry
all right.
about that.
Yeah, it's okay.
Well, good morning, everyone. Now you can see something that's moving more than just my lips moving. The matter before us today is a criminal trial. That criminal trial is for first-degree murder, which is defined as the killing of another person with malice aforethought, whether express or implied. And just to be clear, malice is the wrongful intent to injure another person. That's what we're here for as far as the substance. But a bedrock principle of the legal system of the United States is that the accused is innocent until proven guilty. And the state bears the sole burden of proving both that a crime was committed and that this particular defendant committed that crime. The proof that is necessary must be beyond a reasonable doubt. If the state proves that the defendant more than likely did what they're accused of doing, then the jury must acquit and find the defendant not guilty. This does not mean that the state must prove beyond a shadow of a doubt. The standard is not whether there is a complete absence of doubt, but only whether there is a reasonable doubt. And reasonable doubt is defined as whether or not a reasonable person using reasonable rationale would hold any question whether the defendant did the criminal acts that he or she was accused of doing. So with that being understood, bailiff, what is today's case?
Versus Barrett, Your Honor.
Very good. Then this court is now in session. We have an indictment before us with one first-degree murder charge. The first order of business is to enter a plea for that charge. Is Ms. Barrett here?
Yes,
Are you ready to enter a plea?
yes, plea is not guilty.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barrett. Counsel, are there any motions in limine or any other pretrial motions from either side? Prosecution, are there any motions?
No, Your Honor.
Defense, are there any motions for the defense?
No.
We're going to proceed then with the opening statements, and I would like to ask everyone not speaking to keep your hands off the space bar. And we're going to start with the prosecution because they bear the burden of proof. So whoever is going to be giving the opening statement for the prosecution, is the state ready?
Yes.
Then you may proceed.
Your Honor and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Joshua Kwan, and may I also introduce my co-counsel, Mariana Carnazio. On December 18th, 1988, John Walker Barrett was shot 5 times by his wife, Barbara Allen Barrett, one of the shots being in the head, killing him. The discussion in the case today is whether Barbara Barrett committed manslaughter or downright murder. The night of the murder, John Walker Barrett came home around 9 o'clock. He announced to his wife that he would be divorcing her and leaving the next morning. The evidence in this trial will show that Barbara Allen Barrett intended to harm and wound John even before that night, proving that she had criminal intent to hurt Mr. Barrett. She stated that she loved her husband, it would never hurt him. Nevertheless, Barbara did not just fire a warning shot, she murdered her husband. Our first witness will be CM Chaney. He's an experienced officer with 7 years of service. He has investigated several homicide scenes over his course of work. He is proud to have 2 daughters and a wife. Chaney will tell the court that John Barrett immediately started retreating from Barbara Barrett after she shot him in the leg. Even though Barbara had clearly done enough damage to defend herself, she continued firing. Our next witness will be Lee Porter. She has been working as a housekeeper all her life. She will inform you that on the day of the murder, she saw Barbara come into the house through a private door she has never seen Mrs. Barrett use since beginning her work, and that she was carrying a large gun. Porter will also inform the court that she saw Barbara Barrett chasing after her husband with a gun on the night of the murder of John Barrett, identical to the one earlier that day. Our final witness will be Joe Armay. He's an experienced pathologist and personally studied John Barrett's body the day of the rogue assassination. Joe May will explain to the court how the injuries on the body relate to the scene of the case. Our first exhibit will be the diagram of the house. This will show the court that John Barrett tried to run away from Barbara Allen Barrett. It will show the brutality of her attack. Our second exhibit will be the diagram of the body. This will prove that again, John Barrett is trying to get away. The statute in question today is whether it has been committed by Barbara Allen Barrett is murder. Murder is defined as an act of crime, killing someone with the thought of doing so before the act has been done, with criminal intent and malice. This is the burden that I will be taking in this court today to prove Barbara Barrett murdered her husband. So don't listen to the absurd explanations of the defense, to listen to the misleading, innocent cries of Barbara Barrett, that she did not mean to hurt him. This woman killed her husband, a person she claimed to love, and she knows it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we'll hear from the defense lawyer.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Logan Schneider, and I shall be making the opening remarks in this case. Allow me to introduce my co-counsels, Alyssa Clanaris and Kayla Manti. This case is about a woman who not only lived through horrendous mental abuse, but also lived through horrendous physical abuse. Barbara Barrett is a loving mother of 2 children and has always been an unwavering and faithful wife. On the night of December 18th, 1988, Barbara patiently waited for her husband to arrive home, but she did not know he was going to force his personal struggles upon her. John Barrett, represented by the state, told his wife that his intent was to leave her. Naturally, Barbara was upset and emotional, so she left the room to collect her thoughts and gather herself. Meanwhile, John made the evil plan to force his personal struggles upon her violently. The defendant, Barbara Barrett, loved her husband and never intended to hurt her. However, when John attacked her with his belt, she had no choice but for once in her life stand up for herself. We will prove to the court that John intended to attack his wife and abuse her to even the point of death. We will in addition prove that Barbara was limited to the choice to save herself. Our first witness will be Dana McGuire. Dana is a highly educated psychologist who specializes in abused and battered women. She has written numerous articles in addition to a book called Living in Hell, The Life of a Battered Woman. She will explain to us how Barbara's situation relates perfectly to the cycles of abuses. Our final witness will be Barbara Barrett. She will testify about the horrors of this relationship from the beginning. She will also testify how she asked and asked for comfort, but left with no comfort or protection. We are asking the court to find Barbara Barrett not guilty and to acknowledge that she acted out in self-defense from the abusive hands of her very own husband. Barbara deserves to be understood and not be punished for her bravery. Thank you.
All right, prosecution, you may call your first witness.
Your Honor, I'd like to call Dana McGuire to the stand.
I'm sorry, are you the defense attorney or the prosecuting attorney?
I'm sorry.
That's
Did you
all
say
right.
prosecution?
Yeah, there's no reason to be, I appreciate the excitement and exuberance, but I need to have the prosecution speak first.
Your Honor, I'd like to call CM Cheney to the witness stand.
All right, bailiff, would you swear in the witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm that the evidence you shall give to this court and jury in this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Do so say.
What is your name?
My name is Officer CM Cheney.
What is your job?
I work for the Milton County Police Department as a radio patrol officer.
How long have you been working for the Milton County Police Department?
Since 1982, so about 7 years.
Tell me about your training.
I have had 7 years of general experience and also several hours towards an advanced degree. I have reported several times to the scene of a homicide. I have also been trained thoroughly to preserve any evidence I may find.
Your Honor, I would like to qualify CM Cheney as an expert witness.
Explain what exactly is the nature of his testimony that you want to have as an expert? Is he going to testify about what he saw or about what he thinks?
About what he saw.
All right, then I'll allow it.
Do you ever work with a partner?
I usually work with my partner, Ralph Simmons. He was sick on the 18th and couldn't attend to the scene with me.
When you first arrived at the scene of the crime, what did you see?
As I entered the living room, I noticed there were lots of stains and pools of blood all over the living room, leading into the kitchen. On the floor next to the 2 couches, there was a coat and belt that I decided belonged to the deceased. There was also a bullet implanted into the wall leading into the dining room, along with a blood stain right above it.
Who did you first meet upon arriving at the scene?
Lee Porter, who was the housekeeper.
Where did you find Barbara?
I found Barbara Barrett locked in the downstairs bathroom.
What was she doing?
She was crying and screaming hysterically, saying things like, "I didn't mean to hurt him. Why did he have to hurt me?"
How did she act?
She was quite uneasy and upset.
In your incident report, your exact words were "before she shot him." Can you explain what this means?
From the evidence I have gathered at that time, I came to the conclusion that Mrs. Barrett had indeed murdered her husband. Again, she was noticeably inconsolable.
Where was the body of John Barrett found?
I found the body into the dining room.
Describe the body and position of John Barrett.
The deceased was found face down towards the breakfast room in a pool of blood. In his right hand was a letter titled Tootsie. A pistol was found lying next to that same hand. There were several wounds to the body, including one being to the back of the head.
How many shots were fired?
A total of 6 shots were fired from the same gun.
What did you do with Barbara after you found and removed her from the bathroom?
I arrested her and took her to the local Haddonfield Police Department.
After arresting Barbara, were you able to obtain a statement from her?
Yes.
Was she compliant?
Yes.
No further questions.
Okay, defense, your witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you for being here today.
Of course.
You have multiple jobs, don't you?
I do.
Where do you work for your first job?
I work for the Haddonfield Police Department.
Where do you work for your second job?
I also work as a local security guard for a bank during my off hours.
What are your regular hours of the week?
I do not seem to remember.
Okay. Do you usually drive with a partner?
I usually do, yes.
You were alone on December 18th, 1988, correct?
I was.
Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence the house diagram, evidence number 2.
Are there any objections? If not, so admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. In the house diagram, you do 2 objects on the floor. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Those items were a jacket and a belt, correct?
That is correct.
Your Honor, I would like to bring into evidence the police incident report, evidence number 1.
Are there any objections? There being no objections, so admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. In the police report, you wrote down that the jacket and the belt was on the ground between sofa 1 and the table. Is that correct?
That is correct.
But in the house diagram, the jacket and the belt are in between sofa 1 and the wall. Is that correct?
That is accurate.
So you are also unclear if you read Barbara her Miranda warnings, correct?
I am.
Barbara called a lawyer, didn't she?
She did.
You also filed the Milton County Police report, didn't you?
I did.
That's interesting. Here it says on your own report, you marked yes to stranger and stranger. Is that correct?
I did.
But Barbara and John are married, correct?
That is true.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you very much. Officer Cheney, you may step down. You have another witness. Mr. Prosecution. Does the state have another witness?
Yes.
Then you should go ahead and call him. This one's been excused. Do you have another witness?
Yeah.
Who are you going to call?
Lee
And nobody
Porter.
better say Ghostbusters.
Randy's pretty good. I wonder where he practices.
Can you call Joe May?
Okay, I believe she asked for Joe May to be called. Bailiff, would you swear in the witness?
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm that the evidence you shall give to the court and jury in this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. I do.
Oh, I think I got it right now.
What is your name?
My name is Joe R. May.
What is your job?
I'm an MD in pathology.
Your Honor, please allow me to enter into evidence number 3,
And what is that document?
the diagram of the body.
Could you wait for it to see? Any objections here?
No.
There being no objections, I'll allow it.
Can you identify this diagram?
Yes, that is the diagram of the body.
Would you say this diagram is accurate and all markings are correct?
Yes,
How many bullet wounds did you find in the body?
I found 5 bullet wounds.
Please describe how the bullets traveled into the body and where they are located.
I found 1 bullet through the posterior of the cranium, slightly to the right of midline, at an angle of 45 degrees from the horizontal plane. 2 bullets were located in the back, slightly to the right of midline. 1 bullet went through the upper left arm, from back to front, through and through, and 1 bullet through the right leg, from back to front.
From what distance were the shots fired?
They were fired from at least 2 feet away.
How can you tell?
Absence of powder marks.
What was the cause of death?
The cause of death was a gunshot to the back of the cranium.
Please describe any abnormalities that you found in the body.
I have found a bullet fragments in the back of the cranium and a skin tear to the back of the cranium.
What was the possible causes of this tear?
It was likely that Mr. Barrett hit his head against a large object.
Thank you. No further questions.
Defendants, your witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you for being here today.
You're welcome.
Is it possible to tell what order the shots were fired in?
It is not possible.
How many times was Mr. Barrett shot?
He was shot 5 times.
John was 74 inches, correct?
Correct.
And John was 184 pounds, correct?
Correct.
Was John in good health?
John was in pretty good health, I would say so. Yes.
John was not wearing a belt, was he?
No, he was not wearing a belt.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right. Thank you, Dr. May. You may step down. Does the prosecution have any other witnesses to call?
Yes, Your Honor, allow me to call Lee Porter to the witness stand.
Okay, I'd like to ask the bailiff to swear in Ms. Porter?
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm that the evidence you shall give to the court and jury in this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. What is your name?
Name's Lee Porter.
How old are you?
I'm 47 years old.
What is your occupation?
I'm a housekeeper.
Who do you work for?
Mr. and Mrs. John and Barbara Barrett.
How long have you worked for the Barretts?
I've worked for the Barretts for about 6 months now.
What are your work hours for the Barretts?
I work Wednesday through Sunday from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m.
What was your impression since working for them?
Well, I knew something was just not right, you see.
What was Mr. and Mrs. Barrett's relationship like?
Well, in the time I've worked for them, they did argue quite a bit.
On the night of the shooting, what did Barbara do before Mr. Barrett came home from work?
Well, you see, Mrs. Barrett was pacing up and down the hall, complaining about how Mr. Barrett always came home late.
On the night of the shooting, what did the Barretts do during dinner?
They argued excessively.
Who was drinking on the night of the shooting?
Mrs. Barrett was drinking.
During dinner, what did you hear John say to Barbara?
He said, "I've had it with you, Barbara. Now you know, I'm leaving tonight."
During dinner, what did Barbara say in response to her husband?
Barbara
Wait a second.
responded.
I believe there's an objection.
Objection.
objection?
Hearsay.
What's your objection?
Objection hearsay. She said that she John said something.
Objection. What's your response, counsel?
Me? Oh, yeah.
Going to overrule it. It wasn't offered for the truth of the statement. It's just a statement made out of court. So she can testify to that.
During dinner, what did Barbara say in response to her husband?
Barbara responded to him and she said, "You can't do this to me."
Did you hear anything else?
I did hear what sounded like a car backfiring inside the house.
Then what did you do?
I went to go see what happened, of course.
What did you see?
John Barrett with a piece of paper in his hand, and he was covered in blood.
What else did you notice?
John was limping and blood was on his arm and legs, and he was looking real scared.
Did you witness anything else?
I then saw Mrs. Barrett coming into the dining room right after that with a big gun in her hand, running after Mr. Barrett, who was very bloody.
When you saw that, what did you do?
I ran through the kitchen out of the house, of course.
What happened after that?
I didn't come back into the house until the police came. At that point, Mr. Barrett was dead and Mrs. Barrett had locked herself in the downstairs bathroom.
Did you notice anything else earlier on the day of the murder?
I heard some sounds that sounded just like a car backfiring earlier in the day. Then a few minutes later, I saw Mrs. Barrett come through a door she rarely uses with a gun in her hand.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, defense, your witness.
So it was just you and the Barretts in the house the day of the incident?
Yes, sir.
John had a bad temper, correct?
I mean, sometimes he did, yeah.
When John was angry, what are some of the things he did?
I mean, if dinner wasn't prepared the way he wanted to, he'd throw a fork or something, but usually he was a real nice man.
Did you ever hear Mrs. Barrett scream?
Well, I think there was one time, but I thought they were just arguing upstairs or something.
Didn't Mrs. Barrett cry often?
I mean, yeah, she was crying more and more.
Is it true that you were arrested for theft in 1979?
I mean, I was arrested, yes.
To look further into this issue, we would like to bring up Lee Porter's witness statement, number 10.
Any objections here?
Found it.
I'm sorry. I heard somebody say something.
No.
There are no objections. There are no objections. I'll let it in.
Can you read the last paragraph, please?
I guess I should say I've hardly been in trouble with the law. Only once did I get arrested back in 1979 because some lady I worked for said I took $100 out of her purse. I never did it though. The judge put me on probation and that was that.
We would also like to bring up the final disposition, evidence number 12.
Any objections? If there are no objections, it'll be admitted.
Can you read the section under plea?
Let's see here. Plea, and then there's an X by, like, how do you want me to read this, sir? I'm rather confused by the
Just-
document. I don't know about
Just
about
read the
law.
first two lines under plea, the first two words.
So then the plea looks like there's an X next to negated, and then guilty on counts 1.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you very much. Ms. Porter, you may stand down and you are excused. Does the prosecution have any further witnesses?
Yes, we have. Can I bring up Danny McGuire to the witness stand?
I'm still on the prosecution yet.
Oh my gosh.
Did you,
I'm so sorry.
that's okay. Are there any more prosecution witnesses? I remember, you got to say something, not just shake your head.
Sorry, no.
All right, thank you. All right, now we will turn it over to the defense, and the defense can call their first witness.
Okay, please bring up Danny McGuire, please.
All right, I'd like to have the bailiff swear in Ms. McGuire.
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm that the evidence you shall give to the court and jury in this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name and occupation.
My name is Dana McGuire, and I'm a practicing psychologist.
Where did you go to college?
I received my bachelor's association from the Campbell State University in Havenfield, South Carolina.
What was your master's degree?
I received my master's degree in psychology.
What was your thesis?
My thesis was entitled Passive Behavior and Learned Helplessness in Interfamilial Relationships.
What is your experience with battered women?
I have written numerous articles in periodicals and magazines highlighting the plight of battered women. I have also written a book for lay consumption titled Living Hell, A Life of a Battered Woman. I have an active private counseling practice. Many of my clients are abused and battered women. My hourly consultation rate is $75. I have testified in several trials, both civil and criminal, concerning abused and battered women. Over the past 17 years of my practice, I have interviewed and collected data of well over 300 abused and battered women, and have listened to fragments of 500 such stories.
Your Honor, based on her credentials, I would like to establish her as an expert witness.
There being no objections, it's so established.
How would you define a battered woman?
I define a battered woman who is one who is subjected to any forceful or physical behavior by a man against her will.
Would you say that Barbara is a battered woman?
Yes.
What does it take to be classified as a battering couple?
The couple must go through at least two battering cycles, which can be divided into 3 phases.
How many phases are? Oh, sorry. Can you please define the first phase?
The first phase is a time period where tension mounts between the husband and wife, and there are minor battering instances and verbal.
How long is this time period?
It can last from a few weeks to a couple of months.
What happens between the husband and the wife during this phase?
Each time these minor incidents occur, there are residual tension building effects. The battering man's anger increases because of his guilt and his inability to control his behavior. The battered woman's anger increases as well, though she usually attempts to hide it and prevent even more tension building.
Can you please define the second phase?
This is what I call the acute battering phase. During this second stage, the battering man releases an uncontrollable amount of tension, results in major physical and verbal abuse, and psychological destructiveness between the wife and the husband.
How long is this time period?
A few hours to a couple of days.
Can anyone predict when this acute phase will occur?
No, not even the wife.
Can you please explain the third phase?
This last phase is one of contrite kindness and loving behavior on the part of the man. His actions are usually an attempt to atone for his previous violent behavior. The couple is extremely loving during this period.
How does the battered woman feel in this situation?
The battered woman sees the man as a little boy who desperately needs her forgiveness and who equally needs her forgiveness as well before he can go on living. She feels that the battering was her fault and that she needs to correct her behavior before life can go on and life can be perfect again.
How about the man?
Secretly, feels that he's taught the woman a lesson and that truly he will have no need to batter in the future. He also feels like he's been forgiven and his tension is released.
Can you please tell us about your experience with Barbara Barrett?
I've had the opportunity to interview Barbara Barrett at least 3 times after the killing of her husband, for several hours each time.
Can you explain her situation?
Barbara Barrett's situation at the time was a classic case of a battered wife who suffered abuse from the hands of her husband for years and could not break away from her wham passivity and dependency. The description of violence committed against her is extreme, but not uncommon among battered women. The short periods where her husband showed loving behavior was sufficient enough to see her through the first and acute phase. They gave her continual false hope that he would change his ways and become the man she originally married. She lived from these loving phases to the next, doing her best to suppress the knowledge of her husband's own cruelty.
How did Barbara feel about her husband leaving her?
When he told her he was leaving her, it unleashed an uncontrollable amount of tension, an uncontrollable amount of fury that had been built up for years. She saw it as a betrayal of every effort to placate and create peace in the marriage. It was at this time the reality of her circumstances were made clear to her.
How did she see her husband at this point?
She saw him as he was, a man capable of causing serious injury or even death.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Right. Is prosecution's witness? Prosecution can ask her questions now.
The first time you saw Barbara, it was 2 weeks after the shooting, correct?
Correct.
You interviewed Barbara 3 times, right?
Correct.
So you got all that information from just 3 interviews?
Correct.
Are you aware that Barbara could be making up her story?
Yes, but it's very unlikely.
Are you aware that Barbara presumably lied about the abuse to the police and doctors several years ago?
Yes.
But Barbara lied to the police and the doctors, so this woman cannot be trusted. Do you, as a professional, believe absolutely everything your client tells you?
Yes.
Your Honor, no more questions?
Thank you very much, Ms. McGuire. The court excuses you, thanks you for it, and you may step down. Does the defense have any other witnesses?
Yes, we'd like to bring up Barbara Barrett.
Very good. The bailiff, please swear in Ms. Barrett.
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm that the evidence you shall give in this court and jury in this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you for coming today, Mrs. Barrett. Can you please state your name and occupation to the court?
My name is Barbara Allen Barrett, and I am not employed.
Were you married to John Walker Barrett?
Yes.
Are you a mother?
Yes, I have 2 children. My daughter, Catherine Barrett, is 16, and my son, Todd Michael Barrett, is 18.
Where do you live?
I live at 2437 Rambling Woods Drive, Haddonfield, South Carolina.
When did you first meet John?
I first met John at an alumni function for Vassar in 1978.
What was your very first impression of him?
I was fascinated by his charm, and I had never met anyone as charismatic as John at the time.
Was John aggressive when you first met him?
Yes, after we had talked for about an hour at the function, we went outside to the pool area. Suddenly, he pushed me into the flower beds and started getting fresh with me. I immediately left the party and returned to my home.
Did John apologize after this incident?
Yes.
Did you accept his apology? Did you accept his apology? Did you accept his apology?
Yes, I accepted his apology and agreed to see him 2 days later.
Did you start to date John after that?
Yes, we began dating and saw each other every day for the first 6 months. He was a perfect gentleman and a wonderful companion most of the time.
Did John have any drinking habits?
Yes, he drank quite heavily at social events and at night.
Did John ever abuse you?
Yes, he did.
When did his actions become physically violent towards you?
About 2 weeks before our wedding, John came over to my house. I could tell he had been drinking. He told me he didn't want to eat at dinner, and he told me to fix him a Shavas with water. I fixed him a weak drink on purpose in order to avoid creating a scene. When he tasted it, he threw it against the wall, pushed me with a great deal of force, and slapped me in the face.
How did you try to diffuse John's anger?
I tried to avoid creating a tense atmosphere at all costs.
Even after all of this, did you still marry John?
Yes, I did.
Did John continue to abuse you?
Yes. One time, after we'd been married for about 8 months, he came home after work really late. His face was all red and contorted, and I could tell he intended to beat me again. So I started to run for the door. But when he caught up to me, he began to hit me. And when I fell to the floor, he started to kick me.
What was the next thing you remembered?
The next thing I remember, John had left, and I was being taken to the hospital in an ambulance.
Did he ask you to forgive them after this?
Yes, he apologized and promised there would be no more beatings. I took him back because I loved him.
So you still love John?
Yes, I love John very much.
Did things get better over time?
No, over the years, the beatings seemed to run in cycles. I never knew what I did to set John off or when they would occur.
Did you ever ask anyone for help?
Yes, I talked to my minister, who told me to be submissive to my husband and forgive him. I also called the police after one beating, but they said there was nothing they could do.
Did any other beatings occur right before the incident?
Yes, 5 days before John's death, he came home drunk, took off his belt, and when we were in the bedroom, he started to beat me with it. I knew he was trying to kill me, but I didn't believe that I would actually die.
On the night of December 18th, 1988, what time did John come home?
He came home around 9 o'clock.
Did he tell you he wanted a divorce?
Yes, he did.
Did he say why?
No, he never told me why.
Where were you when you had this conversation?
We were in the living room.
Did the two of you leave the living room after you talked?
Yes, we went into the dining room for dinner.
How did you react to what John had told you?
I was upset, and when he told me he was leaving that night, I began to cry. He told me to leave the room.
Where did you go?
I went into the living room.
What did John do next?
He came into the living room where I was.
Did he have anything in his hands?
Yes, he had his belt in his hands. I thought he was going to choke me and kill me.
Do you remember anything after? Do you remember anything after that?
No, not until the police came and took me away to the station.
Did you give a confession to the police officer that night?
Yes, but I was so confused and upset, and the officer never told me what my rights were. I never would have given a statement if I knew I didn't have to talk to the police.
Did you talk to a lawyer?
Yes, after I gave my statement, the officer told me I could call my lawyer.
Thank you, Mrs. Barrett. I know this must have been hard for you. There are no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. Prosecution, your witness.
Did you meet John at an alumni function?
Yes, I did.
After you were married, did John ever mistreat you?
Yes.
Were you aware of John's behavior / anger before your marriage?
Yes.
Did you have a previous marriage?
Yes.
Do you have children?
Yes.
How old are your children?
My daughter, Catherine Barrett, is 16, and my son, Todd Michael Barrett, is 18.
Objection, Your Honor.
Go ahead. What's your objection?
Asked and answered.
I don't recall the questions about the sons and daughters, but let's move along, counsel, to be sure they're relevant.
When you went to the hospital after a beating, did you tell the people that you had fallen down the house stairs?
Yes.
Did you lie to the people at the hospital?
Yes.
Were you trying to hide the fact that you had been severely hurt?
Yes.
You drank alcohol on the night of John's death, correct?
I had a glass of wine.
Is it true that you are a regular prescription drug user?
I was prescribed tranquilizer.
Answer, please.
I was prescribed tranquilizers.
Yes or no answer, please.
What did you say?
Yes or no answer.
No.
Is it true that you are a regular prescription drug user?
No.
Didn't you state in your testimony that John made you feel like a very special woman?
Yes.
In your statement, you described receiving beatings from John. Did he ever force you to come back and live with him?
No.
At the police station, you were very confused and upset, correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, please allow me to enter into evidence exhibit number 8, Barbara Barrett's confession.
I'm going to see it here in a second.
I have an objection for her confession.
All right, your objection is?
Let's not read her Miranda rights when she gave her statement.
What do you have to say to that, prosecution lawyer?
Can you talk more about that? I don't know what you mean.
The police officer did not inform her of her Miranda rights, and he earlier said that he didn't have any specific recollection.
Okay, but I'm asking her to read her confession.
That's But you're asking it to be placed into evidence, and she's saying it shouldn't be in evidence because of the lack of a Miranda warning. So I'm asking you what your response is to that. Is she right? Was there a Miranda warning that I see in the evidence?
There wasn't, but she still wrote a confession.
I'm going to not allow the testimony of the actual document that's been labeled as the confession. That will not come into evidence. There was no evidence that the Miranda warning was given. So therefore, that does not come in.
Okay. Even though you stated this, oh, sorry. Is it possible that an officer read you your rights and either you were so drunk, high on drugs, or upset, you do not correctly remember the events of the murder?
I was confused and upset.
You were very, very angry at John that he wanted a divorce, right?
I was sad that he was leaving me after
Yes
all we
or
had.
no answer.
No.
You were feeling very angry that John didn't love you anymore, right?
I was sad.
Yes or no answer, please.
I was not angry.
Is it correct you were quite disturbed that he wanted to marry another woman, correct?
Correct.
Good, Your Honor, no more questions.
All right, does the defense have any further witnesses?
No, Your Honor.
In that case, Ms. Barrett, you may stand down. You're excused as a witness. Now, both sides have rested their cases, and the attorneys will now present their final arguments. At this time, I'm going to ask the defense to offer their arguments first. Since the prosecution has the burden of proof, they go last. And I would like to be sure that everybody now has their microphones on mute except the defense counsel, who is going to be giving the closing argument. Counsel, you may proceed.
Thank you. As my client, Barbara Allen Barrett, stands here today, we have the opportunity to take a stand against both abuse and assault. Barbara Barrett was betrayed and abused for years. This type of treatment cannot be accepted in a society that bases itself on values and morals. If she is convicted of this crime, we are then allowing this violence to be justified. In a battering case such as this, we should not punish the victim of abuse for standing up for herself in an act of self-defense. We have a duty to protect those who are preyed upon and acknowledge that the weakest among us have a voice worth hearing. We have the chance today to hear her cries and to avenge the evil that has been forced upon her. There are many undisputed facts that clearly show this incident to be an act of self-defense. The first being Mr. Barrett's explosive and endangering temper. Secondly, Mrs. Barrett looked for support and help everywhere she could, to no avail. Furthermore, over the course of her marriage, the severity of abuse developed to the point of being unbearable. Mrs. Barrett was forced to live her helpless life in fear through cycles of treacherous abuse. Throughout their marriage, Mrs. Barrett remained unwavering, faithful, and devoted to her husband, even through the horrors of his affairs and violence. Self-defense is defined as the use of reasonable force to defend oneself from bodily harm from the attack of an aggressor, that the defender has reason to believe he or she is in danger. Mrs. Barrett had every reason to believe that her life was in danger on the night of December 18, 1988. Standing at 6'2" and weighing 184 pounds, Mr. Barrett towered over Mrs. Barrett in her petite figure, leaving her no physical chance. Mr. Barrett's intense abuse had put her in hospitalization before. He had used his belt as a weapon previously, and that night with his belt off, there was no reason to believe he didn't intend to kill her. Mrs. Barrett was faced with the tragic choice of allowing herself to be murdered or defend her life. We heard today from our expert witness and psychologist, Dana McGuire, who described in detail the well-documented phases of a battering couple. McGuire described how Barbara's marriage was a classic case of a battered wife. McGuire also expressed that with her 17 years of practice, she was able to come to the conclusion that Barbara acted in self-defense when she realized Mr. Barrett was a, quote, man capable of causing her serious injury or even death, end quote. We also heard the testimony of Mrs. Barrett herself. She told us how early on, even just 2 weeks before the wedding, Mr. Barrett went so far as to physically and verbally abuse her just because a simple drink wasn't prepared the way he liked it. Over time, the severity of abuse increased from a slap to punching to kicking to beating with a belt, and finally to Mrs. Barrett ultimately feared for her life. In desperation, Mrs. Barrett tried to reach out to as many people of authority for help. Those people not only turned their back on her, but worse yet, made her feel responsible for her husband's actions. When she saw her husband coming after her in the living room with a belt in his hand, we would all come to the same conclusion that Mrs. Barrett did, that Mr. Barrett intended to, quote, choke and kill her that night, end quote. He would have been successful if not for her bravery. The prosecution relies on the testimony of Lee Porter, who was the only other person in the house at the time of the incident. However, Porter's testimony confirms Mr. Barrett's explosive temper. Even something as insignificant as a meal being overcooked was enough to throw him into a rage. If he was willing to get violent over petty things in public, we can only imagine how he would treat Mrs. Barrett in private over big things. Lee Porter tried to paint a glowing report of her boss, but remember, she has only chosen to be honest when it suits her. In her witness statement, she said she never stole from her prior employer, but to a judge. The prosecution also called forth Sam Chaney, but this overworked officer was very careless in working this case. Between working multiple jobs and working alone the night of the incident, he told us that he has no specific recollection of reading Mrs. Barrett's Miranda rights. To make matters worse, he allowed her to give a statement. She was never even told to talk to a lawyer first. Once again, the system meant to serve the people has failed to protect the citizen in need. All of this evidence comes together to paint a tragic picture of how Mrs. Barrett suffered under abuse for years. She was stuck in a predicament where she was either punished for standing up for herself or standing down and letting violent forces be thrown at her. Today is the day when we get to right those wrongs and take a stand against abuse. I ask the jury to listen to her cries for help. Although we can't go back in time and help Mrs. Barrett find help for herself or a troubled marriage, we can say that it is impossible to allow such pain and suffering to unwillingly be forced upon her. She had every right to bravely act in self-defense. I ask you to find her not guilty and declare her a survivor of abuse. Thank you, Your Honor. That is all.
Thank you. I'd like to turn it over now to the prosecution.
Your Honor, my name is Mariana, and I shall be making the closing remarks in this case. The innocent John Walker Barrett is now dead because his insane wife decided to murder him. Barbara Barrett shot her husband once in the arm, once in the leg, and twice in the back. If that is not enough, she shot the poor man in the head, killing him. If she was just defending herself from hurting her, she would have shot him once or twice just to handicap him from getting at her. Mrs. Barrett claims that Mr. Barrett came at her holding a belt in his hands, and she was scared that he was going to hurt her with it. That does not mean anything. He might have just taken off his belt after dinner and was going to put it down. So if that is why Mrs. Barrett shot her husband, that is a ridiculous reason. She cannot be trusted because she's afraid of the most normal things. We also realize this is murder and not manslaughter, because to murder someone, that person has to use premeditation. We know that she is premeditation because Lee Porter told us in her witness statement that earlier in the day of the shooting, she heard Barbara Barrett shooting in the backyard. She must have been practicing shooting her gun to get a good aim and planning to murder her husband that night. Our first witness, Officer Sam Chaney, was the one who came to the scene of the crime, which occurred at the home of the Barretts. He said that when he walked into their home, he met Lee Porter, who pointed to Mr. Barrett's dead body. He said that he could also hear Mrs. Barrett, who he later found out had locked herself in the bathroom, screaming and crying and saying that she didn't mean to hurt Mr. Barrett. The second witness is Lee Porter. She has worked as a housekeeper for the Barretts for 6 months. She testifies that Mr. and Mrs. Barrett argued a lot when they were together. She also said she felt that something was just not right. On the day of the shooting, Mr. Barrett came home around 9 p.m. He had not been drinking, but he and Mrs. Barrett started to argue. After dinner, they continued to argue, and Mr. Barrett followed Mrs. Barrett into the living room. Mrs. Barrett turned and shot him. As soon as Lee saw that Mr. Barrett was bleeding and that Mrs. Barrett had a gun, she ran to the kitchen and out of the house. She only came back in when the police arrived. She also recalls that earlier in the day, she heard gunshots in the backyard, and a few minutes later, she saw Mrs. Barrett come into the house through a door she rarely used. She had a gun in her hand. That proves that Mrs. Barrett used malice and forethought in killing her husband. The last witness is Dr. Joe Armé, who is a certified pathologist. He was the individual who did the exam on Mr. Barrett's body the day after he was murdered. He tells us that there in fact were six shots fired. Mrs. Barrett also shot her husband in the back of the head, killing him. All of these witnesses truly testify that Barbara Barrett murdered her husband. Murder is the killing of another person with malice and forethought and premeditation, as stated in 16.310 South Carolina Code, murder defined. Dear members of the court, do not listen to the pleas of the defendants. Just because you are scared doesn't lawfully permit you to kill someone. Ignore their confusing remarks saying that Barbara Barrett is an innocent citizen. She must be brought to justice for the horrible crime of murder. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, counsel. At this time, we've heard the arguments, we've seen the evidence, and I'm going to ask that we take a recess, allow myself to think about the legal issues and the evidence, and allow the jurors to think that, and then we will regather later. Thank you again for all of your hard work.
All right. Attorneys, thank you for your arguments on this case. The jurors, you can please proceed with your evaluations on this final case today, and then submit them via email to me. And then the judge and I will prepare to receive those evaluations, and we'll confer on this round, the mock trial, and then we will take a break and we will reconvene. We've got a little bit of time, so
Looks like 4:30.
Angela, at what time?
I believe it's 4:30.
Yeah. So we do have, yeah, according to the, we do have until about 4:30. So plenty of time right now.
Yeah, and David, I must have skipped sending that ending to the jury members that end the closing meeting. So if you hear from any jury members, just tell them I'm getting ready to resend that mock trial invite, or the mock trial closing invite as soon as we end this meeting. I'll email it to the jurors. So if you hear that from anybody, then yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
I think most of us, I think most of us did receive it, but that's okay.
Okay, I'll resend it so just in case, some didn't.
All right, so we will reconvene at 4:30.
Great job, guys.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you.
Nice
Thank
job.
you. Yeah, bye-bye.